BJ, we will start at 2:18, I think, in there. There's a prelude kind of thing by Dallas, so we'll start at around, it's at 2 minutes 18, and we'll stop at 46 minutes 39, okay? Great. Thank you. Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. Y'all are getting to be such good Hebrews. Let's start with a prayer, shall we? O Lord our God, King of the universe, once more we would come asking that you meet with us in this place. We're here because we know in our hearts that the only way to be truly blessed or happy in this life is to follow you. So, dear Lord, make us poor in spirit and meek and merciful. Let us hunger and thirst for righteousness and be pure in our hearts. Should we mourn tonight, please comfort us. Should we be persecuted because we're following you and trying to do what's right? Should others insult us and say all kinds of evil all against us? Show us how to rejoice and be glad. For we ask this in your name, Hashem, the name above all other names. Amen. So tonight we come to the end of our study, the last session of this season 2. Specifically, it's the climax of the whole season, and it's the giving of the Sermon on the Mount. The episode begins, however, with what would appear to be a really random interchange between a landowner and two land speculators. That's the best that we could call them. They're not ID'd by name, but one of them in particular is going to play an important part in the story of Jesus, as we find out at the end of this episode. In the conversation that will be depicted later on between the two men, it will be evident that the younger of them is looking for something more in life, something which you just know is going to be Jesus, right? So where are we? Well, the landowner will say that his property has been in the tribe of Reuben for 40 generations. Does that help you? Reuben, you may recall, was the oldest of the 12 sons of Jacob. He would thus have, by Hebrew understandings, inherited the most in terms of money and authority. But Reuben had an indiscretion involving his father's concubine, Bilhah, which caused him to forfeit that place. If you're into those kinds of things, you can read about it, Genesis 35 and following, followed by Jacob's pronouncement in Genesis 49, that though Reuben had excelled in honor and in power, he was as turbulent as the waters, Jacob said. The original territory of Reuben was by the Dead Sea, down in the southern part of Israel. But perhaps because of such issue, eventually the Reubenites seem to have ended up in the northern kingdom of Israel until they disappeared from history altogether. Some people say that they ended up in Canada. I don't know where they get that. Some say in Missouri. Some say Australia. I kind of doubt all of those. We can't really identify where this man's land might have been from the tribal name. What we do find, however, is that we're in the Galilee somewhere, probably close to Capernaum, or Capharnaum, that adopted hometown of Jesus on the northwest side of the sea. Now, I've given you a map tonight. If you'll take that, you'll look and you'll see Capernaum is in white in the blue sea. You can see where it is. One clue that tells us we're in this general area is that the buyers in the opening scene are actually looking for a hillside out of which they can mine salt. That is significant to the town of Magdala, also called Migdal. You'll see it just to the left of the Sea of Galilee on the western side. It was about 7 miles north of the largest city, which was actually Tiberias, a city built as a kind of a capital. Migdal was not just the hometown of Mary and the Magdalene. It was a village known for its fish processing. Among the archaeological finds there, in fact, people have found all kinds of fishing gear, weights, fish hooks, 40 pools to salt the fish. Fish harvested from the sea were brought to Magdala. They were preserved with salt for transportation throughout the whole Roman Empire. The town became so well known for that, in fact, that the Romans called it by a name in Latin, which means salted fish, taricheia. This preservative quality of salt made it so valuable that salt was sometimes used as currency. This is your little extra tidbit for the night. You can file this away in your trivial pursuit, box. The word for salt in Latin is the word sal, S-A-L, which is where our word salary comes from. Salt, sol, salary. It also explains the saying, somebody's worth their salt. The largest place where salt came from, of course, was the area around the Dead Sea, right? Because the Dead Sea is about 37% salt. It's one of the most buoyant places on the earth. It's a great place to go because you can float. Anybody can float. Any elephants can float in the Dead Sea. Doesn't matter. You say, well, how does the Dead Sea, how does salt get up? And that's a long way. It's 70 miles. Well, in the era before all of this, several eons ago, roughly 2.6 million years ago, in fact, the Dead Sea extended all the way up to this part of Israel. And as it kept shrinking down, it left behind salt deposits, which became part of the hillsides. Excavations in Galilee have uncovered scores of rock-cut, man-made caves, suggesting that there was indeed some large-scale salt production in the Galilee over many centuries. So the best shot is that, from that little clue, is that we're somewhere near Magdala, probably between it and the hometown of Jesus. Now, of more interest is the spot that's going to be identified for the setting of the Sermon on the Mount. If you go to Israel today, with any tour group, most tour guides will take you to a lovely setting closer to Capernaum, right along the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee, which is known as the Mount of Beatitudes. Everybody see it on the map? Okay. In Hebrew, Har HaOsher, which means actually the Mount of Riches. We take it in the mean great fortune, blessings maybe. The disciples in this episode, looking for the right spot for the Sermon on the Mount, will make mention in this episode of the Nahir Kur River. To call it a river is a bit of a stretch. It's a wadi. The wadis were wet riverbeds that only had water in them if there was a heavy rainfall. Think of them as some of our drainage ditches, or some of those lovely retention ponds masquerading as lakes in our beautiful areas around us. The difficulty is that the stream was near this same spot, so the writers of the Chosen have chosen, apparently, to accept this location of Mount of the Beatitudes as the authentic one. And Har HaOsher does indeed have some elevation to it. It rises 410 feet above the lake, which makes it only 230 feet below sea level, because the Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake on the face of the earth, 700 feet below sea level. The areas likewise of the Mount of Beatitudes is in fact large enough for a crowd of maybe 5,000 or 6,000 that might have been there. Pope John Paul II preached to a youth rally there in the year 2000, which had 100,000 people at it on this same spot. But it's actually only been identified as the location for Jesus' sermon since the 1930s, when the Church of the Beatitudes was built there. That's a beautiful, like we said this morning, of the one that was built over the house of Peter. It's an 8-sided church. 8-sided churches were usually designated some memory spot, some important thing, and in this case, it was the giving of the Beatitudes, because there's 8 Beatitudes. Now, there's actually 9 Beatitudes, but the 9th one is an expansion of the 8th one, so just work with it. Nearby, you'll also see Tadha and the Church of the Multiplications, where it said that the multiplication of the loaves and the fishes occurred during a different teaching. That's the only miracle, by the way, that is found in all 4 Gospels. But we should note that there are actually 2 accounts, right? One, the feeding of the 5,000, found in Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9, John 6. And the second, the feeding of the 4,000, which is found only in Matthew and Mark. Now, Tagba is a lovely place too. But Luke says that the feeding of the 5,000 took place near Bethsaida. You see where Bethsaida is? Up a little bit further north, on the other side of the Jordan River as it comes into the Sea of Galilee. This is the hometown of James and John and Peter and Andrew. So it's a little complicated to figure it out. But if you go to Tagba, some of you have been there, you can pick up some beautiful mosaic tiles that have loaves and fishes on it. And it makes a nice souvenir, and it's a beautiful spot. Maybe or maybe not, the feeding of the 5,000 there. But what about the Sermon on the Mount? If it's not Ha-Osher, or the Mount of the Beatitudes, where did the Sermon on the Mount take place? Well, those of you that have been with us to Israel will already know. My friend Jack Beck and I are agreed that the Sermon on the Mount took place on the top of Mount Arbel. Look on the map again. You see just to the left where it says Sea of Galilee is Arbel. To the south of Magdala, directly across the lake from the Gentile city of Hippos, located on the eastern side of the sea. Why do we say that? Magdala, again, was known for its salt industry. Hippos was known as a Roman city set upon a hill, lit up by torches at night, so that it would even shine in the evening. Does those words sound familiar from the Sermon on the Mount? You are the salt of the earth. You are a city set upon a hill. You are the light of the world. Does it not seem possible Jesus is using the geography all around him to sort of make these metaphors work? And far more than Ha-Osher, Arbel is a real mountain. If you look on the back side of this, I've given you 2 pictures, one of the Mount of Beatitudes. You see, it's lovely, okay? The other of Mount Arbel. Now, if you were to say, which is a mount, you would probably say, well, it's Arbel. Arbel is a real mountain you have to climb up to. I think that may, too, have been part of the point. Jesus was not looking for fair weather followers. He was looking for those willing to pay the price of following him. Arbel is 590 feet high, which makes it stand out. Indeed, you can see it has a 110-foot vertical drop on it. It's the only mountain in Israel that's used as a base jumping site. I actually climbed down that one time, and it was a little dicey, I got to say. There was some little ledges and handholds that seemed a little too far to reach to a couple times. But you can climb down it if you're hardy and have a good insurance policy. You ask, well, where is Arbel mentioned in the Bible? And it's not. You won't find it anywhere in the Bible. That's because its presence was so obvious, it's assumed. You could pick it out from any spot on the lake. And if you were traveling down that international highway, it was clearly the most visible landmark. To strengthen the claim, you can see that on the top of Arbel, there is in fact a plateau. Luke's version of this sermon says took place on a level plain. And his sermon is in fact called the Sermon on the Plain. I want to suggest to you, here is a plain on top of a mountain, which is both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, depending upon how you would say it. There's another reason why Mount Arbel may have been the actual spot, though, of the Sermon on the Mount. When you read the Sermon on the Mount, one of the things that will hit you, maybe, is that when you get to the end of it in Matthew 7, it just kind of ends. I mean, there's no closing story. There's no, so in sum, let me tell you, there's not a good joke at the end of it. Homiletically, Jesus was way off on this. He doesn't have the sacco finish, which every sermon needs on this, okay? That may be because the real ending of the Sermon on the Mount comes at the ending of Matthew's Gospel. Matthew 28, where we read that following the resurrection, the disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go, a place they had been before. And there the risen Christ not only appeared to them, but he gave them the Great Commission. Go ye therefore into all nations and make disciples, teaching them all that I have commanded you, baptizing them, and lo, I'm with you to the end of the earth. And then he ascended into heaven. Now that is a sacco finish to a sermon, saying the last word and then ascending up into heaven. One of my churches had this annual passion play that they did. It wasn't great. But they had a lift kind of behind the altar. And it ends with Jesus' ascension up to that. But the lift wasn't that good. And so Jesus was kind of going like this all the way up to the top. And then what does he do? He's up there. He has to come back down, which kind of ruins the whole point of the ascension. Jesus' ascension was a lot better than that. I'm just saying. So maybe this is how we ought to see this. Okay. In the end, let me tell you, you can pay your shekels and take your choice. If you want to believe that the Mount of Beatitudes is where this sermon was given, there's a lot of people who would agree with you, including most of the tourist agencies in Israel. If you want to think, maybe there was something more to this, maybe it's Mount Arbel, then Jack Beck agrees with you, and I would take that any day. Whatever it is, wherever it was, what's important is what Jesus says. Because we're going to see in this episode, Jesus lays down the Sermon on the Mount as a kind of a manifesto, he would call it that, intending to start a spiritual revolution. And don't miss the subtle imagery of who Jesus is dictating his sermon to. It's Matthew who's going to write the most comprehensive version of it down into his gospel. Now, one more thing is just to note that once again tonight, we will find those two Pharisees, Shmuel and Yanni, still trying to report to somebody on Jesus, like school-age kids ready to tell the teacher what the other kids did when she was out of the room. This time they'll be meeting with Shammai, one of the leaders of the Sanhedrin, who, as we have said, was the rival to the followers of another rabbi whose grandson was the head of the Sanhedrin then. Listen carefully for the particular claims which they make against Jesus by his opponents. So with that in mind, let's turn to the episode now, which is entitled